Shadows of the Mind.
Elias arrives at a grim psychiatric hospital on a stormy night. Rain drizzles down the windows, reflecting the sense of dread that permeates the air. Inside, his tense face reveals his anxiety as he is briefed on Naomi's case, a young woman tormented by terrifying visions of shadowy creatures. Shadows seem to cling to the corners of the hospital, amplifying the unease as Elias prepares to meet his mysterious new patient. Inside a sterile, suffocating room, Naomi sits pale and fearful. Harsh lights cast eerie shadows across the walls, amplifying her anxiety. Elias enters the room calmly, his curiosity piqued. Naomi hesitates before she speaks, describing her terrifying visions of shadow creatures lurking just beyond reality. The tension is palpable as her words sink in, setting the tone for a horror-filled journey. Late at night in his apartment, Elias is consumed by Naomi's case, reviewing her files under dim lighting. As he works, the shadows behind him subtly elongate and begin to move, forming unnatural shapes. For a moment, he feels a flicker of unease. He wonders if his mind is playing tricks, or if something far more sinister is creeping into his world. In a vivid dream sequence, Naomi describes the shadow realm, a dark, twisted version of reality. Flashing between close-ups of her terrified face and this eerie world, we see warped buildings and shadow creatures lurking in the distance, always watching. The dream feels too real, and the shadows in her nightmares seem alive, as though they are waiting to break through into the real world. Elias walks through a busy street in daylight, but something feels wrong. The shadows of passers-by seem to take on a life of their own, growing darker and more menacing. As Elias glances at them, they disappear, leaving him unsettled. His face tightens as he begins questioning his reality, unsure whether what he sees is real or the beginning of his descent into Naomi's world. Back in his office, Elias sits with his head in his hands. The gravity of the situation weighs on him as he realizes that he's starting to see the same things Naomi described. Shadows behind him twist into human-like shapes, their silent presence filling the room with an oppressive dread. A close-up of Elias's eyes reveals panic and confusion as the line between reality and nightmare blurs further. In the dark of the night, Naomi runs through the shadow realm in her dreams, the landscape warped and hostile. Creatures of pure darkness chase her, their features blurred and terrifying. The ground shifts like liquid, and buildings tower unnaturally above her. Her face is frozen in fear as she desperately reaches for an escape, but the nightmare seems to have no end. Elias finds himself alone in a dimly lit hospital hallway when he finally sees it, a fully formed shadow creature lunging at him. The creature's features are vague, like a nightmare given life. He stumbles backward, heart racing, as the horror unfolds before his eyes. No one else in the hospital seems to notice, leaving Elias to wonder if the terror is real or if he is losing his mind. Naomi explains the dark truth behind the shadow realm. It feeds on emotions of fear, guilt, and regret. As she speaks, the screen flashes between scenes of the real world and the shadow realm. The city appears normal on one side, but twisted and distorted on the other. Buildings warp, and dark shadows take control, mirroring the emotional scars both Naomi and Elias carry. Elias listens, finally believing Naomi's horrifying truth. Shadows creep further into Elias's daily life. He sees them while talking to patients, walking down familiar streets, and even in his dreams. The shadows draw closer and closer, always on the edge of his vision. Elias's paranoia grows, his face pale with dark bags under his eyes from sleepless nights. He feels the world unraveling around him as the shadow's presence becomes more intrusive. In a series of flashbacks, Elias recalls a tragic event from his childhood, one that fractured his psyche and opened the door to the shadows. The scene is dark and suffocating, as his younger self cries in a shadow-filled room. The shadows are drawn to his guilt, and his trauma begins to make sense, finally linking the darkness to the unresolved pain of his past. Late one night, Elias is attacked by a shadow creature in his apartment. Chaos erupts as furniture is thrown around and a shadowy hand reaches for him. He dodges just in time, narrowly escaping into the street, drenched in sweat. The creature vanishes into the darkness, but Elias knows now that the Shadow Realm is not just in Naomi's mind, it's hunting him too. Elias and Naomi, holding hands, step into the Shadow Realm. The moment they enter, the world around them distorts, a twisted, nightmarish version of their city. Shadows rule here, and the environment feels alive with their dark influence. The buildings warp and the sky swirls as Elias and Naomi push forward, determined but terrified by the horrors they face. Inside the Shadow Realm, the world is suffocating. The sky above swirls with black, chaotic energy, and the ground beneath their feet constantly shifts, ready to collapse. Blurred, horrific creatures stalk them from the shadows, their malevolent presence felt from every direction. Elias and Naomi's faces reflect both fear and determination as they struggle to survive the overwhelming darkness closing in on them. Elias and Naomi finally face the shadow entity that controls the realm. Massive and composed of writhing shadows with no distinct form, it looms over them. The entity offers Elias a dark bargain: stay in the Shadow Realm forever, and Naomi will be free. The tension rises as the camera zooms in on Elias's conflicted face, caught between sacrifice and survival. As the shadow entity looms, Elias faces an impossible decision. His mind races, filled with flashbacks of his trauma, his guilt, and his work. Naomi looks at him, her eyes pleading for life. Elias's face is a picture of inner turmoil, but as the scene progresses, his expression hardens with resolve. He knows what he must do. The battle with the shadow entity takes place not in the physical realm, but in the mind. Elias is bombarded with his worst fears and memories, each one used against him by the entity. The background distorts, reality twisting into a nightmare. But even as the entity tries to overwhelm him, Elias fights back, fueled by his determination to protect Naomi and himself. The Shadow Realm begins to collapse as Elias and Naomi make a desperate run for the exit. The ground shatters beneath them, and the shadows scream in rage. Just before the realm crumbles entirely, a close-up shows Elias gripping Naomi's hand tightly as they leap through a portal back to the real world, barely escaping the nightmare they've been trapped in. Elias and Naomi collapse in the real world, exhausted but alive. The hospital is eerily quiet, the shadows seemingly gone. They sit in silence, catching their breath, the weight of their survival sinking in. But the scars of their journey through the Shadow Realm remain, etched into their souls. The nightmare might be over, but its darkness still lingers. In the final scene, Elias walks alone down a quiet street at dusk. The city is peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of the fading sun. For a moment, it seems as though he has finally escaped the darkness. But just as he disappears into the distance, a shadow figure appears in the background, barely visible. The ominous tone suggests that the shadow creatures may not be gone for good, leaving an unsettling sense of uncertainty for the future.